Buckle up, brother trucker, because we're about to launch into 20 plus minutes of my most favourite thing in the entire world, griping. Yes, I'm British and it's what we do best, so be ready for a whole host of complaining about watches that don't just get my goat, but dress it in a silly hat and shoes as well. The last one will make you physically nod in agreement. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty humbled and blessed today, which is why I'm wearing this lovely sweater, and you can too, along with any other AMW merchandise you so happen to want, available below. Thanks. The internet is, quite frankly, an incredible thing. I learned everything I know from the internet. There's little out there that cannot be known by knowing it online. Socrates said that, according to the internet. And that's because the internet lies like a post-power cut microwave clock. And unfortunately, we believe it. On the internet, you can buy watches, and those watches can turn up the very next day without you so much as having to put your pants on, British or American. But that means the onus to appeal in the metal is left to that first kitchen worktop try-on, surrounded by cardboard and packing peanuts. And sometimes a watch just refuses to sit properly. Like a disobedient dog, it won't sit in that comfortable little God-given flat patch on the back of the wrist designed for watches. It refuses to go anywhere but up on that bony bit that really hurts. Or perhaps it rolls away around your wrist so you have to overextend every time you want to read it, and nothing but having the strap tighter than Amazon's Employee of the Month bonus will keep it in place. There's just no telling how a watch will sit, and sometimes the watch of your dreams just refuses to do what it's told. Whilst we're on the topic of uncomfortable fitment, there are too many bracelets out there that are either too big or too small with no way to find the sweet spot, and so it leaves you with the mildly inconvenient dilemma of choosing between slightly too loose and wearing the watch on the back of your hand, or slightly too tight and losing 10 points in grip strength. I'm not even talking about a lack of on-the-fly micro-adjust, I mean no micro-adjust at all. My Chopard Alpine Eagle is like that, and the only solution is for Chopard to manufacture a slightly larger link to find that in-between size that ends up looking like that one shoe that's bigger than the other. Is it really so hard, even in those streamlined integrated bracelets, to develop a micro-adjust system, even one that can only be adjusted with a bent paperclip and a lot of swearing? Christopher Ward managed it in their cut price 12, and that needs no tools at all. Or even to manage it with a replacement clasp as Moser have done with the Streamliner, so if the standard bracelet fits perfectly, happy days. But if not, there's still a fallback. I just don't think a comically large link is the answer. Since we're on a roll with wrist attachment, I'll throw in bracelet screws as well. Generally, they're the best way to secure the links of a bracelet together, with Rolexes being the class leader, albeit once you've broken the seal of whatever concrete it is they're binding them together with. But some bracelets are held together with a screw system so complex and fiddly and difficult to undo you wonder if it was manufactured by Chubb. A single piece screw bar is great, a quick release bar is better. A 3-piece screw system with sleeve and double-ended screw caps was sent by the devil to cause wailing and gnashing of teeth. You know the ones I mean. You need a screwdriver on either side to tighten them up, and at best you'll lose one of the little screw caps in the carpet pile, and at worst you'll end up in hospital with a pair of screwdrivers impaled into your hands like Wolverine. Scratching your bracelet with this screw style is an inevitability you must come to terms with before you even begin. Okay, last word on bracelets and then I'll move on. Promise. It's a problem I'm yet to experience personally, but I've come across once or twice in my time, and perhaps it feels like penance for being a flash git and having a gold bracelet in the first place. But I'm talking about gold watches with gold screws in them. Not an issue in the case back unless your vocation is watchmaking, but when the strap or bracelet is held in place by a precious metal fixing, then God help you should you ever need to adjust it. See, if you didn't know, gold is soft and pliable, like James Corden's face, and so when you jam a steel screwdriver into it, it's almost impossible for the golden screw head to come out on top. Nope, they spread like warm butter, giving way to the screwdriver without the screw so much as turning even a single plank length. Throw in some of Rolex's famous JB Weld and you'll chew through gold like an evening at Salt Bay. I get why gold screws are needed to match the bracelet, and also not destroy it over time, but that doesn't make working with them any less painful. Moving away from the bracelet now, my next gripe has to do with the primary function of a watch. No, not letting the other passengers know how financially irresponsible you are, telling the time. Lest we forget, these things exist to communicate the series of irregular units we've chosen to measure a day by. The last bastion of pre-decimalization from back when personal transport was powered by hay. So it stands to reason then that readability is key, and so when a watch is pretty illegible, bile tends to rise. I don't necessarily mean watches with smaller subdials for hours and minutes. Those have been created with the express goal of deprioritizing the time for some other artistic intent. I'm talking about basic three-handers with anti-reflective coatings so bad you could do your makeup in it. Given that anti-reflective coatings developed for optics these days are so good, it's pretty much a war crime when a watch has a bad coating, or worse, none at all. It's so straightforward and ubiquitous that when a watch brand doesn't do it, it's like they did it on purpose, for spite. Perhaps instead of reading the time, they wanted you to take a good, long, hard look at yourself instead, and question why you spend all that money on watches. For me, owning something premium and mechanical is as much about tactility through the fingertips as it is the visual pleasure. Even Stevie Wonder should be able to appreciate a good mechanical watch. And perhaps the most fundamental connection you can have with one is through the crown. It's where you screw it down to preserve it, wind it to bring it to life, and set it to sustain its purpose for being. So when turning the crown feels like eating sand, the romance is truly shattered. We're talking bed-pooping levels of de-romancification. There's just no going back from that. Okay, so maybe some people are into that, but literally no one is into having a crown feel like walking barefoot on broken glass. These days, between automatic winding, incredible accuracy, and watch winders, crown operation isn't that often experienced, but when it is, and often as the first point of contact with a new watch, if it gives you Amber Heard levels of ick, then there's just no getting away from that. Sade said it best in 1984. Maybe, just maybe, I can forgive the crown feel in comparison to what we're going to talk about next, because at least the crown feel is dictated by a whole chain of complex parts that come together to bring life to a watch movement. If the winding feel is a little gritty but the movement looks like Doris Payne's storage unit, it's still possible to be won over. When the bezel turns like a rusty pepper grinder, however, that shit's unforgivable. When Moses tripped on his way back down Mount Sinai, the bit that broke off the Ten Commandments said, "Thou shalt not render thine bezels poorly." And there's absolutely no reason to not have a buttery, smooth, satisfying click to every single bezel ever. Once again, Rolex, at one time the most heinous sinner, are now blessed with the most goodly of bezel feels. Each indentation is distinct, but rounded, rather than like riding a bike with flat tyres down a cobbled street. And it's one thing to balance the bezel integers properly between num and notchy, but when a bezel feels like it's been lubricated with the contents of a beach sandal, then it just seems like malice aforethought. If this kind of rhetoric gets you out of bed in the morning, or perhaps helps you get to sleep in the evening, then you'll get plenty more where that came from when you join my wonderful Patreons over on Patreon. A big thanks to those who've already joined me there. Your support means everything to me. Thank you. Look, I just can't stay away from that bracelet, because the bracelet, despite being the least important thing when considering a watch, is actually the glue that binds the whole thing, the rug that really brings the room together. A great watch can be greatly hampered to the point of complete rejection by a bad bracelet, and especially so when the clasp is a complete fail. I'm not talking about micro-adjust, but perhaps maybe the domino effect of it. Thickness. A blocky clasp isn't too much of a problem when out and about, but at a desk, typing on a computer keyboard, pressing against the tendons that let your fingers flex, it can end up being like some kind of medieval torture, ultimately resulting in the watch sitting in the corner of the desk to think about what it's done. Rolex, again, does quite a good job of mitigating this by spreading the load across a wider space for its fully kitted out glide lock clasps, rather than keeping the clasp stumpy but thick. No one likes a chode. Speaking of wearing discomfort, as someone with an incredibly average, well, everything really, but but in this context, wrist. It baffles my brain hole when I slap on a watch that presents a painful wearing experience. Like, did anyone at the brand even bother putting this thing on before slapping it with stickers and sending it to Watches of Switzerland? Maybe the one that peeves me most is the crown that bites back, a sharp, undignified protrusion that leaves a mark on the back of your hand like you're an 80-year-old man. I'm not old enough to wear a permaplaster just yet, and so I reject the watch whose crown tries to give me a hickey. It's usually the bigger, heavier watches, but every so often you come across an example that has absolutely no business putting its twisty bits anywhere near your skin. In fact, I may as well throw in any watch with sharp, bitey, hair-pulling bits that would have immediately been apparent to the manufacturer had they only gone and tried it on. From an aesthetic perspective, I like to keep my watches looking pretty factory fresh when I can. I don't baby them by any measure, except maybe King Herod's, but since I was brought up on the mentality that if you break it you're not having another one, I tend to naturally look after my stuff. That is, with the exception of, even with a proactive attempt to prevent it, clasps with polished centers. I haven't had many, but when I do, they end up looking like the Berlin Wall. They end up so run down even Banksy wouldn't be interested. I don't know why brands persist on finishing watches with polished clasps, but when they do, even the use of bad language will scratch it. It's not like you can even see that it's polished when you're wearing it, but you can definitely see how scratched up it is every time you put it on. It's like a constant reminder of the mess your fragile life is under a surface veneer of orderly polish. No? Just me? One of my favourite complications is the chronograph, a timekeeping contraption that baffled even the brightest watchmakers for the longest time when it came to compressing them for the wristwatch format. It's an amplification of not just the visual exploration of watchmaking from a collector perspective, but that tactile one as well, inviting you to interact with it on a more intimate level than pretty much any other complication. Operating a chronograph is like the open-heart surgery of watchmaking, interfering with its life-giving beats by means of external tools that reach in deep inside the delicate stuff. Except activating some chronographs feels more like operating with chopsticks, the pusher feel needing way more force than you're comfortable imparting, before finally giving way with a wallet-twitching snap. The best chronographs balance a uniform feel across start, stop, and reset, with a firm enough press not to feel sloppy, but not so hard it seems like you'll break it, with the actual pusher snap solid but damped, and not like how it feels to lift things with your back and not your legs when you're over 40. One of my most favourite things in the world is the feeling of fresh satisfaction you get from watching Karma get its own back, but failing that, a good strap change is also pretty dang satisfying. A watch can go from tired and obvious to fresh and exciting with a mere exchange of boots, and thus the desire to spend unreasonable amounts of money on a whole new timepiece is quashed for just a little bit longer, or at least until the end of this video. So when manufacturers deliberately set out to levy their lugs with unorthodox distances, again it feels like they're doing it on purpose. Really, Grand Seiko? Really? Your watch would have looked like Satan's own armpit if you'd fitted it with a 20mm strap instead of 19. The conspiracy theorist in me believes that the lizard people, whose shed skin only comes in strips of 19mm, are attempting to monetize their annual exfoliation. Or perhaps Grand Seiko made a bad decision once, and they will refuse to acknowledge it until their dying days. Deathbed admissions have never been so niche. We're back to me tactiles again, because when someone chooses to buy a manually wound watch, it's usually not by accident. Very few these days are manual wind, but there are still a few that are, deliberately intended to be like the driving stick of watchmaking. And when you think of cars intended to be enjoyed au manuel, you think 911 ST or the glorious T50. Now imagine if, instead of a snappy short throw gear change lever with the automotive journalist's classic, a rifle bolt action, Porsche and Gordon Murray had chosen to stick a wooden spoon in a jar of cold treacle instead. Because when a watchmaker makes their manual watch hard to wind, that's how it feels. It might be because of an impossibly small crown, or perhaps because the mechanism is just too tight, but given that it's an exercise owners have to go through at least every other day, you'd think it was a #1 priority to make that wind silky smooth. The old Omega Moon watches used to be like that, a really stiff, sticky feel with what felt like eons between each click. They finally learned after long enough, however, with a 3861 a lot better on that front. Side note on that one, if you do indeed have to wind your watch every other day, I imagine you're probably quite happy with it not being water resistant enough to bother the Titanic, since unscrewing it and screwing it back up again just to add some power is not only inconvenient, but pretty risky too. That's why the Panerai locking crown guard was invented, because soldiers were chewing through crown threads like a teething polar bear. Dive watches actually need to be automatic to officially qualify as a dive watch by the International Organization for Standardization's standards, so the Venn diagram for watches that need both manual winding and a screw-down crown looks like Anya Taylor-Joy's eyes. Watchmakers, don't cock-block me from getting my manual wind action. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please do give it a like, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. That lets me know you like the video and it lets YouTube know as well. Thank you. I really do wonder about Swiss watchmakers sometimes. Like, are the people who work there real people, or are they just aliens masquerading as humans to try and study our ways? The Longines Legend Diver, now since fixed, was an example of this in action for the longest time. A watch that was so proportionally exacting in every single way except for one crucial element: the long lugs. Giving a beautiful watch buck teeth like that just seems like an exercise in cruelty, as if denying the world perfection just to humiliate potential customers into thinking their wrists are smaller than they actually are. If you've never suffered from wrist extensor lug gappage, be thankful. It's when the lugs hang out so far over the curvature of your wrist, it proves flat earthers wrong. With CAD design and 3D printing and rapid prototyping, it's not hard to try out a watch design before it goes into production. So when a manufacturer greenlights a wrist sled, it makes me wonder what on earth the process is for testing it. Maybe having Andre the Giant's larger nephew in charge of product design isn't the best thing to do. I hate to be Mr. Rolex again, but here's another thing that cements the crown at the head of the hierarchy, even if you didn't know it. It's not possible to break the Rolex date window. Well, I mean, it is if that's what you're actively setting out to do and you've got the will and the means to do it, but when setting the date on a modern Rolex watch, it's impossible to break. So that begs the question, why are other watchmakers still telling us not to use the quick set date close to midnight? If you've got no idea what I'm talking about, many watches with a self-changing date have a mechanism that starts engaging a few hours before midnight, and finally releases again a few hours after. Different manufacturers advise different times, and all of them will tell you the watch will break if you quick set the date in that period, which it will, which is stupid. Maybe you're wondering why someone would even set the date around midnight anyway, but think of it like this. You haven't worn your watch in a while. It stopped around 10. You don't know that's 10 PM, you pull the crown out to change the date and bam! You're now going to endure the customer experience of the service department over a grueling period of at least 4 weeks. No such problem on a contemporary Rolex. Set it whenever you like. So why not everyone else? I'm actually not that bothered about watch loom because, well, I've never had cause to need it. I don't like sleeping with a watch on and I've got a bedside clock. But nevertheless, if a watch has loom, it should at least be decent. It doesn't have to be like playing stare-outs with a de-spectacled Cyclops, but it should be good enough to glow bright enough for long enough to, you know, have a reason for being there. Once again, we come back to the fact that it's very much possible to have loom that looks like it should trouble a Geiger counter on even an affordable watch. So when a pricey one puts out a glow like E.T. flipping the bird, you have to question why. A bit of glowing paint is probably the cheapest part of the watch, so when that gets skimped on, it really brings down the entire experience. We want a dive watch glow-up revolution. One of the markers I think of a watch that looks expensive is the depth of its reho. That's the metal spacer ring that fills the gap between the dial and the crystal. Our Lange & is especially good at using razor-thin rehos. When it's deeper than Tolstoy, however, it ends up making a watch look like a dirty fake of itself. It's not necessarily easy to do, requiring a greater amount of precision from thinner components, which becomes increasingly tricky the thinner those components get, but it's not too difficult to style it out either. Chopard does a great job with the Alpine Eagle, using a stepped chapter ring between the dial and reho to visually reduce the height of that vertical ring. You could say it's cheating, but ultimately it works. That's all that's needed, and so the Alpine Eagle ends up looking much more expensive because of it. But on some watches, it's just so deep that even trying to blend between the two just isn't going to cut it. Take a look at the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore. That dial's so far away from the crystal, it's in a different time zone. It actually gets worse with that watch too, with versions using a chronograph module pushing the date back even further behind the dial. The only advantage is you can throw in a coin for good luck. Perhaps more of a psychological issue with watches when buying pre-owned is choosing one that's quite easily faked. With simpler designs, it's pretty much neck and neck now between the real things and cheaper imitations. At least on the outside. And that makes buying one of those watches through unauthorized means pretty unsettling if you don't know what you're doing. Without getting the watch checked over by the brand at great expense to yourself, every day could be spent wondering if you've been grifted. It's especially true of something like Panerai at the cheaper end of the scale, especially with the older models. The movements have long since been cloned to a reasonable quality, and when the watch has a solid case back, it's impossible to even see. The case, dial and hands are pretty simple, so replicating them to a level of indistinguishability isn't exactly difficult. That's why, if you don't buy new, you need to buy based on reputation. A retailer selling pre-owned watches needs to be staffed by experts who don't just know what they're doing, they enjoy it as well. Or the other option is to exclusively buy watches too weird and unpopular to be worthwhile faking. There's been a trend on watch-based social media for criticizing watches at the molecular level. I'm talking about 2 times macro on less than a millimeter of hand finishing and pointing out that there's a misplaced atom. It's kind of absurd. On the flip side, when a watch has a piece of dust that's just about visible, there's nothing that can fill up my head so fast. Even if it's only visible in a certain light at a certain angle, if it's there, on the dial, under the crystal, every time I wear the watch, it's all I can think about. I'll drift off mid-conversation because it's all I can think about. I'll drive to an unknown destination because it's all I can think about. That piece of dust is like a singularity, letting not one bit of my conscious get away from it. At service at least, many watch manufacturers adhere to the 30cm rule. That's when a watch is 30cm away, if the defect can't be seen, it's all good. That's because servicing especially can't match the same exacting procedures as manufacture, with equipment like tooling and jigs, and even the environments themselves, compromised compared to HQ. The net result is a difference imperceptible by 99% of people, but sometimes there's a little bit of something that sits very close to that threshold that makes it through. And it's the worst. But all that pales into nothing when it comes to watches that suck like a nuclear vacuum cleaner. The absolute worst ownership experience, beyond any other watch, is the one you had to buy as part of a bundle to get the one you really wanted. How can you ever wear that watch without thinking about how you've been played like Van Halen's Frankenstrat? If they're watches you wanted anyway, then Sunday, Monday, happy days, but if they aren't and you can't bounce them out without losing your trousers, then they'll just have to sit there, even when you do get the one you want, mocking you with a gentle tutting as they count out the hours since your AD last had his way with you. Thankfully, this is becoming less commonplace as watches get easier to purchase, however, it's not entirely extinct just yet. And for those who were inflicted with it during the hype period, they're going to be in deep for a long time yet. And remember, none of this is really necessary, so you don't need to compromise on anything you don't want to. There are more great watches and manufacturers out there than ever before, so take your time and enjoy the ride as you look for the right one for you. There's no need to end up with a watch that sucks. See you next time.